Thanks so much for being here, first of all. So if you're thinking you're here, it's lunchtime, I appreciate you giving up your time. And why is this for you? Today's focus is kind of where this all started for me and the reason that I do the work that I do. So I'm really glad that you've made the time. And if you are here, there's usually a reason. You might be working in a place that leaves you feeling exhausted, frustrated, or quietly doubting yourself all the time. You may be leading a team and constantly firefighting bad behaviour rather than doing meaningful work. And you might be dealing with a family or relationship dynamic where you're walking on eggshells all the time. You can't quite explain why and put your finger on the reason so that you can actually do something about it. And before I go on, I want to say really clearly that if you are struggling in a toxic environment, and we're going to talk a bit more about what that actually means, it is not because you are weak or too kind or too soft or sensitive or naive. It's usually because something that's important to you is being violated repeatedly, and that's okay. That's real. That's what happens to everybody. So we're going to talk about what a toxic environment really is and what it isn't. And we're going to talk about why high integrity, values-led people feel it the most. How your values, when you actually understand and use them, can be a really powerful tool, and you're the strongest way to protect yourself, your health, your mental well-being, once you're aware of those things and how they show up. So we have about half an hour, 35 minutes, and in that time I'm going to be giving you a bunch of ideas and questions around values, what they mean, and get you to hopefully think about your own values and what they are. And also think about why certain situations or certain people just keep pressing those buttons that really wind you up. And then I'll share an exciting new way that can help you to work out those reasons for yourself and your specific situation. And we'll have a little look at that before we finish later. So hopefully that sounds good. So what is a toxic environment? And we hear a lot of things bandied around, quite often around, if someone's having a bad week, or you've got a grumpy colleague, or a stressful deadline, or you're anxious about doing something well in your role. But that isn't really toxic. That's just difficult or stressful or creates anxiety. When an environment becomes toxic, and whether it's in a workplace, like I said, or with individuals, and it can be in a family or relationship situation, that toxicity is systemic. It's where certain behaviours are repeated, they're tolerated, they're normalised, they're left unchallenged by other people around them. And over time, that erodes trust and confidence and well-being. That is what defines a toxic environment and what makes it so damaging to us in the long term. So some of the examples and common signs of what is a toxic environment, things like lack of communication, lack of information. Often it can be deliberately withheld, so you're kept in the dark, or things change without an explanation, your input isn't required, and so it's unsettling. There's drama, so people act in self-interest, and often there is drama associated with that, or blame or scapegoating, instead of people being accountable. So that sense of people will look out for themselves first, no matter what the repercussions are for others. Poor behaviour is excused, so often by senior people in a work environment, but it can also be within families. A parent may overlook the behaviour of one of the children or one of the relatives, and that can be debilitating and undermine your self-confidence as to why you're feeling something and other people don't seem to mind. And often you're told to be more resilient and step up and deal with it. You start censoring yourself. So people often become quieter in a toxic environment. They think more carefully before speaking, or they stop altogether. So it's a real sign of a toxic culture in a workplace, but also toxic families and relationships when one of the partners or one of the members of the family just becomes quiet because there's a sense of, well, it doesn't matter what I do, it's not going to change anything, it's not going to have an impact. And so slowly you step back and you shrink more and more. And another key sign is that your body knows before your brain. So often we have physical signs and symptoms of the stress and the anxiety that's being caused. So things like that Sunday dread before you go to work on a Monday, not sleeping well, tight chest, realizing that you're not taking deep breaths, you're just shallow breathing, that low level anxiety that hangs around because your body is dealing with what your brain is using to ignore or cope with in the best way that you can. So there is a great impact to toxic behaviour in cultures and in workplace cultures. This is just a snapshot from the Workplace Bullying Institute, where they measured the impact psychologically and on well-being for people that were involved in bullying, grievances, toxic environments. And as you can see, it goes from 30%, like a third almost of people have some kind of post-traumatic stress disorder as a result of that behaviour. Almost half have new or worsened depression as a result. And a really high 80% suffer paralysing anxiety. So anxiety that interrupts your normal life and kind of impacts you constantly. And so this is why in that kind of sense of emotional manipulation, feeling guilty instead of being able to talk about things, where you see control disguised as care, and we get a gut feeling, we sense that behaviour and we sense that something's not right, but often the gap between what we feel and the information that our brain is giving us to deal with it is not enough for us to be able to cope with it properly. So one of the most important things to understand is that toxic environments don't damage everybody equally. And this can be one of the key factors in understanding why you are so impacted by a toxic environment and people around you. So they hurt people with strong values the most. And I'll explain what I mean by that. If things have meaning to you, if you care about doing work properly or anything that you do with integrity, you often assume that other people do too and have that expectation. And a lot of my clients will talk about situations where they start questioning themselves. Maybe I was just overreacting, and also ultimately feeling shame around the fact that you can't handle the situation as well as other people seem to, because the problem stops looking external and starts to look like you and starts feeling like you. You feel that you are the problem. And it's really important to recognise that you're not, that is not the case. And so I've jumped onto this image of past life, looking a little bit younger and fresher on some of those pictures. And this links to the very reason why I do this work, like why this is important to me. I didn't come into this area of work through theory and study. My background was in film and TV initially as a screenwriter and a producer. And then I became a senior lecturer in higher education, coaching new writers. And like all of us, I spent years in environments where different people would cause problems, power dynamics could be unhealthy, behaviour was excused often because of someone's status or their talent, particularly in the TV industry. People get away with a lot because they are seen as really necessary for a production or some success of a project. And values can be talked about, but they're not really lived. You don't see them and you don't think about them. And sometimes I could cope better in those situations than others. And I didn't really question it, but it was only when the repeated behaviours became constant, there was bullying and toxic leadership in a higher education environment for me, that eventually undermined my self-awareness, my self-confidence. I started questioning myself as to why I couldn't cope with this behaviour. And eventually it made me ill and I had to leave that environment. That was the only way that I could do it. And what changed everything wasn't learning to cope better or be stronger or be more resilient or look the other way. I started to understand that my reactions were information. The discomfort that I was feeling was real data. And my values were being violated and I didn't have a language or structure. I didn't know that. I didn't understand that then. It was only when I did my own values discovery work that I understood that honesty was a core value for me and it was being triggered every single day. So it made sense. It gave my brain the reason why, the story behind the responses that I was having every day. And no matter what I did, it would never have changed that because those values were completely misaligned. So I didn't understand how my emotional responses were connected then directly to my core values and the meanings that I had for them. And this is the key. It's really important. That realization became the foundation of my work and eventually the values fingerprint, which is what I do now. We talk a lot about values. We hear the word and the term a lot. And often we don't think about it too much. We think we've got a grasp of it. I certainly did. And most values work will talk about things like behaviours that are expected, but they live on posters on walls or journals. They stay quite abstract and hard to grasp. And so because of that, they just become a list of words that don't really have a lot of meanings or practical power in them. Choosing words like integrity, respect, kindness, they don't help you. If you think of those as your values, that doesn't help you when you're in a difficult meeting with somebody that treats you really badly, or you're dealing with a manipulative colleague or friend and you're trying to get the courage to say no to something, or trying to decide whether to stay or leave a situation. Knowing that integrity and respect are important to you doesn't give you any tools. You have to dig deeper. You have to understand why they are so part of you and your story, and then you can understand how to use them. So you need that clarity, you need that evidence. And what doesn't work, that missing jigsaw piece, is that understanding, that depth of understanding of the meanings of the values and where they come from for you, why those are your values, why they're important. It's not enough to just choose the words that you think or sound good or are, inspirational, aspirational values that you want to have. And what doesn't work is just hoping for things to change or working twice as hard as someone else to try and please people, to try and make the bad situation go away. Waiting for someone to leave or move departments doesn't work. It might work temporarily, but you still have to learn how to deal with it on a day-to-day basis. Keeping your head down, just ignoring it to go away, just takes part of you away. You're not living fully. You're not living your job fully or your relationship or whatever the situation is. And just following policy, hoping that the bully will be dealt with, hoping that the right things happen. Unfortunately, we learn as we go through life that that is not the case. So we have to find a way of protecting ourselves and being able to deal with that situation ourselves. And that's what I think really getting the depth of meaning on our core values is where that missing piece of the jigsaw comes to life. So I'd like you to think about your top values and what they are. Can you pull to mind quite quickly what your top values are? So often, you can come up with words like I've mentioned before, like integrity, respect, kindness. I can see that some people on the call already have done some of the work with me, so they will have a good understanding of what their values are. Just kind of jot them down. Just think about what are those top 3 values that you would say, yeah, this is me, this is who I am, this is what's important to me. And what you'll see is that they're very broad words. And when we start to dig down, we then get to that idea of how unique those things are for us. So you've got your fingerprint that's it's as unique as your fingerprints. It's shaped by your lived experience. It leaves traces wherever you go. And you look here on growth, so this is one of my core values, and you can see some of the meanings that I have for this value. So, lots of exercises that I do with clients and people, I'll say, what does growth mean to you? And I will get lots of different answers. Some of them will be similar to what I've got. Lots of them won't be. But it's how it's working out, digging down, really thinking about what those words, what those actual meanings are for you and why that's important. And they start to build up the picture of what your unique core values fingerprint is. So it's the difference between your core, your personal, and your social values. Often when people think of values, they just think of one term for all values. But a lot of the research that was done primarily in the 60s, sociologists, people like Maurice Massey, who worked on the basis that our core values are developed as children in the early years. but they are determined by other things through our life, and that's where we've got personal values. So personal values very much make up the values that we hold as we go through life, and how we like to behave, how we expect other people to behave. So that's very much where things like integrity, kindness, respect, behaviors that we expect and we learn, they're the things that come into there. Personal values that change, a great example is if you have children. Your personal values change in that maybe going out every weekend with friends takes second place to actually wanting to spend time with your new baby, or having to. But in my case, I was quite happy to give up partying for the quieter life at home. So it depends on who you are, the experiences that you have, and they're your personal values. Social values are the values that come around in whichever environment we're in. So, for example, a workplace, a team will have its own set of values that everyone knows to operate by those. Most of the time, these things aren't explicit, they're not stated. We just get the sense of how we should behave. Any group, it could be a church, a local church, it could be a choir group, a family, school, all of these places in society have their own sets of values that they work by. Plus the greater social values of things like we don't kill each other, we don't steal, etc. So they're the things that we all live by to some degree. And then you've got your core values, and these are the ones that are your unique 5. It's usually 3 to 5 core values that people have, but 5 tends to be the norm. And these are completely unique to you. So they link the important bits that are missed out in this jigsaw puzzle of understanding ourselves is that the meaning that's created by understanding these values and connecting those to our emotional parts of our brain, that's the bit that's often left out. So that meaning, like I said before, if you say, oh, I'm in a meeting dealing with somebody who makes me feel physically sick every time I'm near them because I'm so stressed, you knowing that, oh, integrity and kindness, growth are my core values, like that, why can't I deal with the situation? There's no connection between the name of that value and what it means to you personally and how that impacts your brain. And then you can start to manage behaviours as a result of it. So it's what matters to you, it's why, how it shows up, when it's honoured, what happens when a value is triggered or violated. And once you know, they act as your emotional trigger warning. So, for example, back in my situation, I would receive emails from this colleague who was bullying me. And every time, and I'm sure you know the feeling occasionally, every time I saw the name, my stomach would lurch. I'd feel a bit sick. My heart would be racing. You get throat tightening, dry mouth, all of those symptoms of emotional stress that your body goes into because it recognizes the feeling, but your brain doesn't understand that actually this email is not going to harm you. There's nothing there to harm you. So you have to build an understanding of why that's upsetting you, and then you can deal with it. So my approach to using values is very much a blend of the values themselves and the depth of understanding those, plus story. So really your stories, who you are, and all the years of my work in the film and TV industry, and then working with writers and ideas and script development for many years. It amazes me how we are so hardwired for story. That's how we communicate with each other. It's how we understand ourselves and the world around us. And so relating those values and their meanings to who we are as people, the stories in our lives, the good times, the bad times in our lives, is blended with the knowledge of neuroscience and how the emotional brain works. So those 3 things come together to actually give you a sense of how it can work, and how it's a very valuable tool in real situations. So one example, one of my first clients actually, and she was a senior lawyer. She hated her job when we met. She could not see a way out. She felt that she wasn't being a good mother to her sons. She felt sick whenever she had to see her manager, and felt hopeless, actually, just really hopeless as to how this could ever change. She needed the job, she needed to earn money. How could she ever change this situation? And after we'd done the work together with the values, and She was a client who I coached over a few weeks. So it wasn't just a one-off session. She was regained that kind of excitement about her future. She appreciated the great relationship she had with her sons. She said one of the great things was that she felt like she walked taller. She just had more confidence. She knew who she was, and she laughed about the same manager just a couple of months later. The person that she couldn't even say her name because it made her feel so bad. A couple of months later, she could laugh about her and could sit in appraisals with her and manage it because she had done the work on what was triggering the response. And once your brain has an answer, then you go from feeling, oh, this is unbearable, to actually, I know what my boundary is now. I understand why I feel this, and so I can do something about it. Another client realized that the anxiety that she experienced wasn't generalized. It flared up every time one of her values, which was fairness, actually, was undermined. And so she started to recognize that as a leader with her teams, and she could put things into place to highlight to other people to mitigate that value being triggered. So she knew the exact reasons why, and so she would be clearer with people in her team about what was expected in certain places, rather than just presuming that people understand, because they don't. Someone else understood that staying silent in meetings wasn't a lack of confidence. It was her integrity value being repeatedly compromised. Instead of trying to push herself to speak, she recognized that actually the reason she didn't want to speak was because she had nothing to say in that environment. And so once you can see the meanings and how they relate to those values, you can stop internalizing the harm, really, and thinking about the damage that it's doing. And so I'm really excited because as I mentioned earlier, one of the prime ways that I work with people is in coaching individuals and also group coaching for teams and leaders. But I've finally been able to develop, because the whole point of it is that it is about meaning and the individual. So it's taken me a while to work out how to create a way of doing that it doesn't take as much time and doesn't cost as much money for you to be able to understand your own values and have that first layer of self-protection for yourself in whatever toxic environment that you're in or trying to deal with. So now I've come up with what matters most, your DIY values discovery. So it's your own, you work on your own with a video and resources, which I'll explain to you as I go through. And that is £97. That QR code on screen is the link to check it out and check out all the full details. So you'll be able to look at that. Most of the people that I work with who've come through a toxic experience, and not everybody has, that's not all of the work that I do. They can't all, the main thing that they talk about is how the toxic experience or person really undermines their confidence and their self-confidence. And that can last for a very long time. It lasted a long time with me. And there are moments that it's still there. I have to stop myself and think through the reason why I'm feeling about something the way that I am. So I know that not everybody can access one-to-one work. And sometimes you want to do this work privately and not necessarily open up to somebody that you don't know particularly well. And so creating this video workshop became the closest way really for people to experience the values work, get the same benefit without having to actually work with me directly. So what do you get in this offer? Primarily it's a video which lasts around 35 minutes, breaks down into 5 main steps that you can pause as you go through to kind of do the work. And those 5 steps are what create your values fingerprint, your core values fingerprint. And it's the exact same process that I use with my clients one-to-one. Obviously, the coaching part of it and the exercises and things that we do in conversation on all there. But the actual process of how we uncover the values is there. And the video is me talking to you, explaining what it all means, talking you through each of the exercises, giving you examples, telling you stories around myself or clients that have done the work, so that you get a really broad context of where this work sits and how to do it. You also get an audio version of it, so you can download the audio and listen to it again and again. You can listen to it easily while you're making notes or out for a walk if you want to kind of go over something that you're not quite sure of. And there is so much in there that you will want to listen to it more than once, I'm sure, and go back to check how have I done that again? This is coming up for me. Is that right? You know, you can go backwards and forwards, and you have lifetime access to this, so it's not something that disappears after a certain time. So you get the video, you get the audio version to listen to. You also get a workbook that you can download, a PDF that gives you the tools, the exercises, the worksheets, explains the process as well. So you've got that to work with as you go through, and contains all the worksheets and images and the lists and things that you need to work through all of the information. It's guided, so I'm guiding you all the way through, but it's also reflective, so you can stop the video. It gives you time to go off and think about what something means to you, reflect on the questions, give it time, come back to it the next day if you want. It's self-paced, so you can make it work for you in whatever your schedule is. And it's, you know, practical tools you end up with that you can return to again and again when you're unsure or off centre. So what you will end up with are the example I gave before about sitting in a meeting and knowing that, you know, integrity is a core value to you and how that doesn't help in that moment. The work that you do by breaking down those meanings, by connecting those to the stories in your life, all of those things will actually create the detailed tools that you can use in a situation, because you can actually recall them very easily because it's as simple. You're using your 5 values. You can look at your hand. I have people that, you know, in meetings actually work through the values on their fingers, and just as a calming way to remember who they are and why this matters to them, and it kind of rebalances and regrounds them in a specific situation. It is self-paced because the work needs space. Like when I do the coaching work with people, we do it over a few weeks because you need that time for things to, you know, percolate, for things to sink in, for life to happen that you can then respond to. But quite quickly, you start to recognize the values in action around you, things that you haven't really noticed before. You start to see why you feel things in certain situations. So it's important to build that knowledge, and I call it like your evidence file, really, because you are creating that information for your brain, so your brain has the right story and is not directly going to something that's not correct, not the real reason why you feel a certain way. So actually having that language, and people often say to me, you know, I feel like I can trust myself again, I feel calmer, and I finally have language. I have the words for being able to explain to people what I won't tolerate and why it's important to me. So when you're dealing with a toxic environment or people, or recovering from one, this is often the most grounding first step that you can do, because it helps you to focus on why you're okay, why these things have impacted you because of who you are, and that's okay. And the other person or the other people in a situation have not been impacted because their values are different. They are driven by different things, and you're never going to change that. So somebody who's driven by, you know, has a core value around status, for example, can often be behind the reason why, as a leader, they will do things that hurt other people, because ultimately it's not that they don't care at all, it's that the core value for them of gaining status is more important, and that's the thing that they have to fulfill. So there, it goes into a lot of detail, but certainly as a starting point, this video is just a great way in to be able to start this journey on your own. And it costs £97. So I will finish with this. The QR code is there if you want to take a look at it. And toxic environments thrive on confusion, self-doubt, and silence. They're the things that really impact people and cause the stress. So once you take control of who you are and know and have that evidence and have it written down, having done the work, having gone through this video, you then have clarity. So you have real clarity on who you are, why things matter to you. And in turn, having that clarity then gives you real certainty about the reasons why you feel certain things, but also why you want to do things and need to do certain things. So it gives you that permission to act. It gives you that feeling of feeling protected because you know who you are, which ultimately then gives you choice. It gives you the ability to decide how you want to deal with this situation. And that gives you a quiet confidence. You know, that's the thing that I find the most, that you sit confidently in yourself because you know who you are and what you need and what's important to you.